me without this mic. Okay. I want to welcome those who are here that are guests with us for the very first time. I'm seeing our numbers are growing with babies. I know what you guys have been up to. Now that you're seeing the babies here, thank you for adding to our numbers daily. Those who are being saved. And I want to just really appreciate those who have been part of our journey as we have talked about. Perhaps this is the promised land that God has given to us as Nairobi Chapel Lavington. I want to thank those of you who have pledged, those of you who have given. And if I can quickly put up a little graph about how well we are doing, just to say that our goal that will help us fully move onto this property before we begin the conversation on purchase, which we are actually hoping to begin having as we meet the family this coming week. It's actually a conversation I want to ask that you put in prayer, that you allow that we would be, what's a word? There would be favor in that conversation. But for us to settle well here, to get our children's classes up to scratch, to get Cabro that I have promised us to get, and our very own tent, it will cost us in the tune of 15 million shillings. So far, however, we have given in cash about 14% of that amount and have pledged a further 10%. And that will get us our Cabro in the next couple of weeks, but it would need a concerted effort because we are praying by faith that we would settle this in December. And so if you're wanting to pledge and haven't yet or give and are part of this journey, that QR code up on the screen will get you to a place that would allow you to pledge and to connect and to even get more details about what we are asking for. Because we are also inviting for us to give in kind. If you're a professional contractor, if it's your hardware business, and we are able to connect with you, please allow that you come and we together do what we cannot do alone. That this journey would be one that would help us to settle onto this land we feel very, very strongly God has allowed for us to settle and to be a part of. So again, thank you for each one of you who has honored their pledge, everyone who has given generously, everyone who has given sacrificially, everyone who has said above and beyond my tithe and offering, I want to be a part of this. Thank you for beginning the foundation that will be true for generations to come of those people in this area who are determined to reach out to the brokenness around us. And you know that is our reality. Well, our little clip showed us a little about suffering. And it's been a very hard sermon to prepare for. Can I just say that for free? Mostly because, this song that they have just sung was my anthem through this week. Or month of preparation. And I know the reality as a minister, when I go into places that are painful and hard, I can't quite even say that I know what you're feeling because my suffering and your suffering are different, varied at different levels. Your journey may have just made this even so much more bigger. So I have a deep appreciation that this topic is not an easy one. I also have a deep appreciation as a culture, we have a way of seeing suffering and painful things. Somebody looked at you with a bad eye. Your neighbor gave your children a something or other. Don't we have those things? Remember your mother said, don't eat at this and so's house because you don't know what will happen. We have an interesting relationship with hard things and tough times. And most of us, our default because of how we were nurtured and raised, is to imagine that someone has caused it, something has caused it. It has come because I was looked at, I was thought of, someone planted. And every time I have conversations, especially about why the people in Africa have a special appreciation of the Holy Spirit, is because we know spirits. We know bad spirits, malevolent spirits. We've heard what they do, we've seen them come. If you've been to the coast, you do know about those spirits. The one that come in black cats, and come when the wind blows. I mean, I have friends who have been missionaries at around the coast, and they have, I can't even say, like stories. And you're like, are you making this up? So we have a special appreciation of why bad things happen to good people. So please turn to the person next to you and tell them to give you the answer to this question. It will just help my sermon. We'll just pray and go home. So what do you think? Why is it that bad things seem to happen to good people? Because surely there must be a reason. The earlier statement had been, why does God allow? Then I removed that and I said, let's not put God here. Let's just answer the question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And if I can get a mic, please, because I'm curious to hear. Because I'm sure I'll just need to pray and conclude our service. Some of you look like you are just waiting to be asked. All right, these guys have a lot of answers. Can I have a mic on this side and on this side, please? Kyan, you have the mic. What did you hear? Why do bad things happen to good people? You heard something. Who are you talking to? And what did they tell you? Please use the mic and stand up.
Expecting it. To be honest,
what did you hear? What did you were exchanging numbers. What was going on?
So for me, I was talking with Cargo, who was there, but we were saying like, we're not really good people to begin with.
You went theological, eh?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because we had sinned from the very beginning of time, and we were already born with sin.
Yeah.
And so originally bad had already entered into the world.
Is that what you think about when you're going through a very tough time? Are you like, this is happening because I'm not a very good person? Don't answer that.
Nah.
Somebody else who has a mic? Yes, right here. Zelani needs a mic. It's right. Okay. It's not on. Or is it?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll present for a group of 3. We had 4 key things.
Oh.
Why
listen carefully, people. Your notes, please. Just remove your pads.
To good people. So the first one was around, it could be God taking you through a season of testing.
Uh-huh.
So then, we are just patient through that.
Okay.
The second one is it could be an attack from the enemy. So for those 2 variations, we need to work with God and know which is which and know how to pray. Then the third one is we live in a community and not everyone is good. So some people just do bad things. And then the fourth one is a matter of choice. That sometimes we make decisions that, land us in bad places, or other people make choices that end up being bad for us. Thank you.
All right, let's say the grace as we end our service. That was all I was coming to say today. Somebody else who wants to conclude that? Yes, sir. Yes, Caris.
The question was answered with a question. Why not?
Why shouldn't bad things happen to good people?
Yes, and why not? And should good things happen to bad people?
Should good things happen to... And you sat down. We were concluding the service and you were the one who was finishing it up for us. All right? On this side, there's some profound thoughts right here. Right here, yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jolene, and when we were discussing, I think one of the reasons why we go through trials and tribulations is just like Paul said in Romans, that we should rejoice whenever we are facing trials and tribulations because they produce perseverance, and perseverance helps us to build our character. It gives us like a toughness that is important for good character.
All right, this is me going home. I think it's a wrap. Thank you, Jolene. That really is spot on. There was 2 more hands were there.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We were also in a group of 3, and the visitor was nudging me like, speak. So we said in the beginning, at the fall of man, life was good before then, so there were no bad things. Then there was the fall of man. But the second thing also is that Jesus said, in this world you will have many troubles, but have overcome the world. So that means that that's a given. We will have bad things. So it's just about knowing who to turn to overcome the bad things.
Thank you so much. There was one more hand, and I don't want on this side. Okay.
Thank you. Hold on, let me check. Okay. Good morning, church.
Good morning.
Well, my mom seems to have a different perception. She said it's... Sorry to put you on the spot.
Please put your mic close to you. So
I'm sorry.
There.
Sorry to put you on the spot. So she said, she gave like an example of Job, basically, how Job was good, yet he was still tested. Bad things happened to him. I want to add on that and say it's about God also testing our faith. That's the first thing. And number two also is because the enemy is also testing our resilience and our faith in God. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So turn with me to the book of Job, chapter 1, like literally. But before we get there, let me just say that last week we had the honor of having Pastor David Pim from a church in Australia, Sydney, Australia, come and just sort of give an overview. And most of you who have spoken have mentioned one of the reasons why there is suffering and why in the middle of all that, God is still sovereign. Either he uses our suffering to help us know him. God uses our suffering to give us the experience we need to comfort others. God uses our suffering to remind us to rely on him rather than ourselves. And there are many circumstances that bring pain and grief and sorrow and brokenness into our lives. Sometimes we see them coming, sometimes we don't. And so in the next couple of weeks, as we unpack this a little more, today we are going to find out about finding faith by quieting the noise. Because I can tell you, in the midst of tribulations and tough times, there is a lot of noise from everywhere. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. That as we try to quieten our noise, we get to struggle and our faith is tested. In the midst of all that, we need to hear the right noise and then to strengthen our faith through trials. The next slide. Next week, we'll be talking about the crossroads. Why the voice of God is the most important noise to hear. That we will be searching for meaning in suffering. We'll be seeking to understand God's way. We'll be submitting to God's wisdom. And then at the end of the month, as we close on this series, we'll ask, so who do I believe? And what does it mean to cling to God's promises? What does it mean to be comforted by being in God's presence? And how do I find confidence in God's purpose, even when it's really, really, really hard? One of the things as human beings we know is that we like things to have order. That's how we rationalize a lot of life around us, okay? So you go to school and you read for your exams, and what happens when you read for your exams? You pass, and what happens when you pass? You graduate and you go to the next level. So there is something about putting in and removing, putting in and getting a result. And we all know the law of causality that says every action has a reaction. Every action has consequence. So if we love God, if we obey God, if we love his people, if we are just and good Christians, so can every good Christian please just raise their hand so that we acknowledge you? I see that hand. Just keep it up. Then everything in our lives will be good. It follows without saying. If I've put that in, then the results that should be coming out are good results. And if you eat well and exercise, and then what happens? You should be healthy. If you're kind and loving in your relationships, as a good wife, you're submissive. As a husband, you are a provider. Then you should always have an amazing and healthy marriage. If you raise your children, you didn't spare the rod, you made them come to church, you corrected them and did right, they said thank you and please at the right time, then of course there'll always be those kind of children. And so what happens when the reverse becomes true? When everything that we have put in somehow does not get us the results we have wanted. Our marriage is falling apart even when we have considered ourselves good. Our children are prodigal, even when we have considered ourselves good parents. We've prayed the right prayers. We've exposed them to the right things. We've taken them to the right places. What happens when I have put in everything I can for a work promotion and then somebody else gets it? What happens when I am doing right and then in my eating well, being healthy and exercising, I get a cancer diagnosis? What happens? But it's even worse when sometimes it's out of our control. Where was God when I was raped? Where was God when I was beaten? Where was God when I was cheated on? Where was God when a loved one was murdered? Where was God when my child was abused? Where was God when 21 young students burnt to death at Hillside Academy in Endarasha? Why are bad things happening to good people? And our human nature is to want justice because we know how to resolve it. Put this in, get this out. And if it's unjust, we want to right the injustice because something has to balance because of everything we have put in. And so we are poorly trained prosecutors in this whole conversation of trying to right the wrong. We ask God the wrong questions, and many times don't even stop long enough to hear his answer. Why do bad things happen to good people? C.S. Lewis is a very respected author, and he wrote several theological books, very powerful books, until his wife died. And he wrote a book called Grief Observed. And a quote from his book says, "Suffering is like a door slammed in your face. And then there's a double bolting on the inside. And after that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer we wait, the more the emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the window. It might as well be an empty house. In suffering and in pain, you are completely engrossed in your circumstances. You are caught in a swirl of apprehension, of anguish, of regret, of confusion, of bitterness, of emptiness, of fear, of uncertainty. We look at our friends, some people who we feel are not good people, are not followers of Jesus, and wonder why God is blessing them and not us. We are the followers of his son Jesus. So why are we in the midst of a trial, a tribulation? Why are we suffering? Aren't we good people? Like I mentioned before, there's an element of innocent suffering. And the book of Job talks about that. And we'll read that in a little bit. This man was blameless, a man of integrity. He feared God. He stayed away from evil. And the journey through the book of Job is an answer that many of us have asked some questions about. And yet it doesn't fully resolve that million-dollar question. Why is there suffering? There is a cause-effect suffering. Something that I did. And Job's friends pick that out immediately. You must have sinned. You must have done something wrong. And when I dug a little bit on this, one of my questions had been to the Lord, why is it that I am allowed to sin? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Why did I make that decision that is causing me so much anguish? Why did I get into a place where I'm abusing alcohol and drugs? Why did I choose to cheat on my spouse? Why did I get into a business that I knew was risky and now has imploded? Why did I borrow money from work and now I'm in trouble? Why did I overlap and now I'm in a car accident? Why did I make that decision? The Bible talks about God giving us the will, the free will, to make choices. And many times you and I know some choices that we have made get us into real trouble. Genesis 2:15 says, the Lord placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. But the Lord warned him, you may eat freely the fruit of every tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you eat of its fruit, you will surely die. And the question you and I may be asking is, so why couldn't he just make them fruit salad? Why did he give them the opportunity to choose a fruit that he knew was going to cause all of us anguish? Why would a good God allow us to choose to do evil? or not. Out of the 600 rules that the Jews had to obey in the Old Testament, Jesus in the New Covenant summarized them to two. In Matthew 22:37, he says, when we love God with all our heart, with all our minds, with all our soul, then we will naturally make decisions that please God. Our choices will be focused on pleasing God because that's part of our relationship with Him. Love signals a relationship. It signals the opportunity to love freely. And so what free will is not a setup. It's not like you were told, let me see how well they're going to do. It really was the opportunity for us to make a decision to love God with every part of our being. It is what catalyzes love. It makes you be patient. It makes you be kind, not be jealous or boastful or proud. It makes you not rejoice in justice. Love is always hopeful. Love endures all circumstances. Love is a choice. All of our relationships are a choice, but especially our relationship to love the Lord. And therefore choose to do right. And so the answer to why God gave us free will is that so we may love Him, that we may choose Him and have a relationship with Him. Without the option to choose, we cannot call it love. And so I allow that we turn to God's word and truly to Job chapter 1. Especially because the whole issue of suffering has been perverted in these recent times. I've been appalled when I hear some of the teachings that have become commonplace and we are taking in. There is one I know around a group of men who have insisted that if your marriage is not working, you have been married to the wrong person. And that God will forgive you for leaving that marriage because He's going to bring the right wife to you. I don't know where that came from. And so allow that we turn to God's word this morning from the book of Job chapter 1. Real quick. It's a long read, but I'll quickly go through it. In the land of Uz was a man whose name was Job. And this man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all people in the East. And his sons used to hold feasts in their home on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. And early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of his 10 children, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was his regular custom. In another realm, one day, angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan said, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, and a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job really fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you put a hedge around him and his household? Or have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread around throughout the land. But now stretch your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely cast you to your face. Then the Lord said to Satan, very well, then everything that he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And one day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby. And the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came. And he said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burnt the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, another messenger came and said, all the Chaldeans, they formed 3 raiding parties. They've swept down on your camels. They made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger said, your servants, your sons, your daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept from the desert. It struck the four corners of the house. The house collapsed on them. They are dead. I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up. He tore his robe. He shaved his head. He fell to the ground in worship. And he said, naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. On another day, the angels once again in this other realm came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, who came with them to present himself before them, said, the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it, which is M-O. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless. He's upright. He's a man who fears God and shuns evil. He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now you stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely cast you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat amongst the ashes. His wife said to him, Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. And Job replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon Job, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him, and they began to weep out loud. They tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. There are many characters and people that are part of this narrative and story. And theologians have never been able to quite pin who wrote the book of Job or where it originated from. In its authentic writing, it was a set of poems that were put together to help us understand what real suffering is. Now, we need to know that Job was not a Jew. He was not an Israelite. He was actually a man from the East. And they say it was around the area where the present-day Saudi Arabia is. So he was not a man who had an intimate relationship with God, but somehow he knew him. He revered him. He chose to do right. He sacrificed for his children. He lived a life of integrity, even in wealth. He chose to do things right. And then calamity struck. In the middle of our storms, there is wind and hail and gale, but they're almost always a representation of different voices that speak to our circumstances. And so we are going to just talk a little bit about who are you listening to in the midst of your pain. The first person that came up to Job when he was in the middle of this was his wife. And it's so funny that many people are called by name in this passage and this portion of God's book. But his wife remains nameless. So we shall call her. What name shall we call her? Who are those people who are just... You can't call her Joy. Who? Mrs. Job. Okay, Mrs. Job. There's always a Mrs. Job in your life. Can I just tell you that for free? Who comes to you and says, just give up. This is too much. Not one human being should go through this kind of pain. Curse God and die. And of course, Job's immediate reaction is kind of harsh though. And he says, you speak foolishness. Shall we only receive good at the hand of God and not receive bad? But that's the first voice that's always speaking into our tough spaces. But many times, that very extreme voice can be our own thoughts. When you tell ourselves, you know what, I've given up. What else does God want from me? How much more can I be good? I've done everything right. I'm giving up. I mean, who is God and where is he when I need him? So I'm done with you, God. I'm cursing you. Even I'm done. And I know there's several ones of us sitting here that have been in those places when you've said, I'm done. I'm done. And then there are Job's friends. There are three of them mentioned at the beginning. There's Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. And one of the things that I found so beautiful before we get into their space was that they heard about his crisis and they showed up. And if there is anything that is a takeaway from this is, are you the friend who shows up when someone's situation needs just the ministry of presence? Because that's what they did. Now, I don't know if you have friends who can show up in your house or in your space and just sit silently with you for 7 days and 7 nights, because I want you to share with me that friend. My friends will show up and try to solve. They want to feed me. They'll want to, it's just our right response. But I thought it was such a beautiful response to this pain that they just came to be. They showed up. They were also so moved by his suffering, they sat with him in solidarity. Didn't say a word. Deep empathy is a gift we can give one another. We're in the middle of pain and storms and tribulations. And not to say those little things we say, I know what you're feeling. Because you never will. Excuse me, my circumstances are not quite yours. As a congregation, we have experienced our share of pain and suffering. And I know some of you are here in the season that one of our lay pastors, Madam Brenda, was in an accident and she went to be with the Lord. And that really, really, really wounded us. Just the reality of a woman who was in service for her country, but even more for her heavenly Father's kingdom. And Pastor Sulanji's transition. And then just this year, Pastor Justin's passing on in January. It is still hard, it is still raw, it is still fresh, especially for the staff team. We worked so significantly with Pastor Justin. It has been so hard when we visit with Georgia, his wife, and their children. Just trying to figure out, should we say, should we not? How do we stand with you? And it's going to be a tough Christmas, to be their first Christmas without their husband and father. And those seasons are difficult. What do we say? But the other thing that these friends do is that they do not dismiss Job's suffering. They acknowledge it. They say, it is real. You have lost your children, your wealth, your servants, your identity in society, who you are. And later on in scripture, they actually financially support him. And so those are good voices, okay? Those are the people who we invite and ask God to bring in our seasons when we are in pain. Until they open their mouths and then it all goes south. So his three friends begin to sort of probe and try to figure out, okay, what happened here? What is going on? Part of it, of course, is a resolve for themselves. Because you know how it is. When you're in a place where you don't understand, you want to find answers. And mostly the reference point is your life. Okay, what happened? And the main theory is that God never afflicts a righteous man. And since Job was afflicted, he must be unrighteous, sinful man. The first guy, Eliphaz, was a spiritual voice. And he claimed to speak absolute truth. And he is the proponent of retribution, that God punishes the sinner and God rewards the righteous. In chapter 4 of Job, it says, would you mind if I said something to you? If I was Job, I'd have said, yeah, I do. And then he says, under the circumstances, it's hard to keep quiet. You yourself have done this plenty times. Spoken words that clarify and encourage those who are quitting. But now you're in trouble. You're the one hurting. You've been hit hard. You're reeling from the blow. But shouldn't your devout life give you confidence now? Shouldn't you have an exemplary life that gives you hope? And then he goes on to say, has a truly innocent person ever ended up on the scrap heap? Do genuinely upright people ever lose out? His argument is that righteous, good people are never punished. There should never be suffering. If you're doing things right, if you're being obedient, if you have integrity, if you're living what it is that is said of you, you must be living right. And this is true about our situations and circumstances in life. There's always an Eliphaz. That person who wants to dig deep about your sin. Tell me, who did you look at with a bad? What is it did you do? Is your business right? Did your children do that? I mean, they want to find fault with others because we all see clearly that other people's suffering is caused by sin. Well, our own suffering is caused by something else. So there's an Eliphaz, the second voice in this story. The third voice in this story is a gentleman called Bildad, and he's a traditionalist. He has unbending allegiance for the things that are tried and true. And most of that, again, is that suffering causes sin. He says in Job 8, how long will you say these things and the words of your mouth to be a great wind? Does God pervert justice? Or does the Almighty pervert what is right? In other words, he's saying, in a very not compassionate sort of attitude, that you are inherently evil, Job, because if you're a pious, holy man, these things would not have been happening. And there are these people around us that are voices into our space of pain and suffering. They're not afraid to let us know about what they think. And they're usually the same people, again, who are unable to recognize sin in their lives. And if they pause long enough to remove the log in their own eye, they immediately turn around and use that log to beat us dead with it. And they do not bring us comfort. And then there's Zophar, who was a reckless dogmatic, a straight talker who believes in talking the truth. He says, God's doctrine is pure and I am clean in God's eyes. In Job 11, he says, but that God would speak and open his lips to you, that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. So the Zophars in this world claim to know the mind of God in every situation. And so they are the only ones who can give you the correct solution to your crisis, to your problem. Let's go visit Prophet so-and-so. Put money as seed. Let's pray for 60 days. And those are places of breakthrough. But sometimes there are places when we stop hearing the voice of God. Because to be honest, it is natural human nature to want to remove pain as quickly as possible from our circumstances. I don't know how many of us bask in the warmth of an illness and say, I'll take this because God is speaking to me. Naturally, we want a doctor solution. Naturally, we want medicine. Naturally, we want an intervention. But many times, we can choose that and miss out on what God is saying in the midst of our dark season. If we are honest with ourselves, almost all of us have gotten to a season when we are looking for answers in our pain, in our grief, in our betrayal, in our shame, in our plain suffering. And we conclude, God is silent. He's quiet. He's forgotten me. He doesn't love me. He just doesn't care. And does he even exist? The fourth friend and the fifth voice later on in that passage, in the book of Job, in chapter 32, is a young man called Elihu. And his name means, he is my God. So because he's younger than the others, he has been quiet, sort of just listening at what they're saying. And he does say some of the things the other friends have said. In terms of asking, what Job, what have you done? But he also comes in and says that maybe we should listen to the voice of God. The essence of his discord is summed up in the middle of chapter 33 of Job. And he says, for God speaks in one way, in two, though man does not perceive it. This is what it says. But let me tell you, Job, you're wrong. You're dead wrong. God is far greater than any human. How dare you haul him into court? And then complain that he won't answer your charges. God always answers one way or another, even when people don't recognize his presence. Verse 15, in a dream, for instance, or a vision at night, when men and women are deep in sleep, fast asleep in beds, God opens their ears. He impresses them with warnings to turn back from something bad that they are planning, from some reckless choice, and to keep them away from an early grave, from the river of no return. Or God might get our attention through pain by throwing us on a bed of suffering so that we can't stand the sight of food. We have no appetite for our favorite treats. We lose weight. We waste away to nothing. We are reduced to a bag of bones. We hang on the cliff edge of death and know that the next breath may be our last. But even then, an angel will come, a champion, and there are thousands of them to take up your cause. A messenger who would mercifully intervene, canceling the death sentence with the words, I have come up with a ransom. And before you know it, you're healed, the very picture of health. You may fall on your knees and pray and see God's delight. You'll see God smile and celebrate his doing. And yet still that doesn't give Job a satisfactory answer to his questions, because at this point he begins to ask, am I even asking the right questions? Elihu's greatest contribution as this voice was he prepared Job to listen to God. Are you that person for others around you? Do you have an Elihu in your life? And so at the beginning of chapter 38, God begins to speak to Job. And he asks a series of questions, intending to remind him that God, he himself, is infinitely powerful. His ways and thoughts are higher than Job's. And Job's immediate perception is that I was asking the wrong things. I was listening to the wrong voices. And so when God pauses for a moment at the beginning of chapter 40 and challenges Job to answer him, Job basically says, God, I'll shut up. I'll be quiet. I'm willing to listen. And so God speaks to Job all through to the end of chapter 41. And he realizes that when I go through trials, what matters is who I know, not what I know. Job is no longer focused on the why he has suffered. After hearing from God, he's satisfied with the fact that instead of knowing about God or of God, he now has an intimate relationship with a God who is actually engaging him. And so he is no longer obsessed to knowing why. His heart's honest desire is now to know who. Something has changed in God's heart. In trying to find the answers to why I'm suffering, many times I found it futile because it gives me only lasting relief. And I find that in my midst of my trials, I still don't know God because I'm trying to resolve it, to fix it, to push it away, to chase it. And I'm not asking, God, let me know you and what you're trying to grow in me, change in me, conform, move in me in the middle of my pain. It gets me to a place of deep conviction that God is 100% in control. God is 100% good. God 100% does not make mistakes. Those are very tough confessions when you're in the middle of pain. But that is how you know you have transitioned from the why to the posture of who